The morning rush at the Lighthouse Café was merciless. Zoe's hands trembled as she poured coffee. Another night spent watching her mother's labored breathing instead of sleeping. Her bank account held $11.04. The surgery bill? $15,000. Hope? Barely a flicker. Then the door opened. A group of sharply dressed men entered, led by someone whose presence commanded the room despite his disheveled appearance. He was frantic, soaked with sweat, breathing hard, and claiming he'd lost his wallet right before a critical meeting. Her co-workers exchanged skeptical glances. Customers stared. But Zoe saw something she recognized. The raw fear of someone on the edge, with only $10 separating her from complete ruin. She quietly pushed the bill across the counter. Tomorrow, 10 billionaires would walk through that same door, and nothing would ever be the same. Before we continue, kindly help this channel grow by hitting the subscribe button. Thank you. Now, let's get back to the story. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning Logan Square's streets into rivers of gray. Inside the Lighthouse Café, the yellow pendant lights cast warm pools across worn wooden tables. But the warmth didn't reach Zoe Thompson. She moved behind the counter with mechanical precision, pouring coffee, wiping surfaces, smiling at customers who never looked up long enough to see the exhaustion carved into her 28-year-old face. Her white shirt was crisp despite everything, tucked into black trousers, a bright orange scarf tied at her neck, the only splash of defiance against the drabness threatening to swallow her whole. Her hazel eyes, shadowed by sleepless nights, tracked the clock. 8:47 a.m. 13 hours until her shift ended. Then home to her mother, to another night of monitoring breathing, adjusting pillows, pretending everything would somehow work out. The surgery Joanna needed cost more than Zoe would make in a year of double shifts. The number haunted her. $15,000. Impossible. Absurd, a wall built specifically to keep people like her on the wrong side of survival. The cafe was nearly empty. Rain kept customers away, and the silence amplified the ticking clock, the hiss of the espresso machine, the whispered conversation between Tiana and Marcus near the kitchen. Zoe mechanically wiped down the counter for the third time, her mind elsewhere. At the clinic where doctors spoke in careful measured tones about deteriorating conditions and limited time windows. At the apartment where medical bills covered the kitchen table like fallen leaves. At her mother's face last night, trying to smile through pain, saying, "Don't worry about me, baby," even as her hands trembled reaching for water. The door burst open with such force the bell above it shrieked. A man stumbled in, soaked despite the expensive cut of his navy suit. His salt and pepper hair was plastered to his head, his white dress shirt transparent with rain, his gray eyes wild with something between panic and desperation. Behind him, 4 other men entered, equally well-dressed, equally out of place in this neighborhood cafe. One wore traditional Middle Eastern attire, pristine white despite the weather. The others were in tailored suits that screamed money, power, international business. They moved like a delegation, like men accustomed to rooms going quiet when they entered. "Excuse me," the lead man said, his voice breathless as he approached the counter. Water dripped from his jacket onto the floor. "I need an Americano and whatever pastry you have. Quickly, please." He paused, patting his pockets with increasing franticness. "I lost my wallet in the cab. Major meeting across town in 20 minutes, and I can't." The words died in the awkward silence that followed. Tiana, wiping down tables nearby, let out a short laugh. "No money? Then what exactly do you expect us to do about that, sir?" Her tone was flat, dismissive. She'd seen too many hustlers, Too many people with elaborate stories. Marcus emerged from the back, took one look at the situation, and crossed his arms, his mustache twitching with barely concealed skepticism. The other customers glanced up with mild interest before returning to their phones. The delegation of men behind the speaker shifted uncomfortably, clearly used to very different treatment. But Zoe saw something else. She saw the way his shoulders had curved inward, the desperate calculation in his eyes as he weighed his options. The exact same expression she wore every time she counted coins for the train or begged the pharmacist for a payment extension. She saw someone who, in this moment, was stripped of whatever armor money usually provided. Someone human. Someone afraid. Her hand moved to her apron pocket before she could think. Inside was her wallet, thin, worn at the edges, containing one $10 bill. It was all she had until Friday's paycheck. If she gave it away, there would be no food tonight, no CTA fare, no emergency cushion if her mother needed medication. Just 3 days of empty pockets and careful rationing. But something heavier than fear moved through her chest. A voice that sounded like her mother's, like every lesson about doing right even when it cost you everything. She walked to the register. The cafe went quieter. Tiana stopped mid-wipe. Marcus frowned. Zoe pulled out the $10 bill and placed it in the register with steady hands, then began preparing the Americano. "The coffee and croissant are on me," she said quietly, not meeting anyone's eyes. The man stared at her, and for a moment she thought he might argue. His mouth opened, closed. "Are you certain? You don't have to do this. I'll pay you back, I promise. I know I don't have to," Zoe replied, placing the steaming cup and a wrapped croissant on the counter. "But I want to." Her voice was soft but firm. "Today for you. Tomorrow someone else." The man took the coffee with both hands, as if it were something precious. His gray eyes held hers for a long moment, searching for something. "Thank you." "I'm Andrew," he hesitated, then extended his hand across the counter. "Andrew Gate. I won't forget this." Zoe shook his hand briefly, noting the expensive watch, the calluses suggesting he wasn't just another bureaucrat. "It's nothing, just coffee." But it wasn't nothing. Not to her, and judging by his expression, not to him either. He nodded once, then gathered his delegation and left, the bell chiming behind them. Tiana appeared at Zoe's elbow immediately. "Girl, you just gave away your last money to some random businessman? What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about what my mama would do," Zoe replied, returning to wiping the counter. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. She'd help. "You're too kind for this world, Zoe," Marcus said from the kitchen doorway, though his tone had softened. Too kind by half. Maybe she was, but kindness was the only currency she had that couldn't be depleted by poverty, that couldn't be stolen by circumstance. It was the one thing she could still choose to give. The shift crawled forward. More customers trickled in as the rain eased. Zoe served them all with practiced efficiency. But her mind kept returning to the encounter, to the stranger's eyes, to the name he'd given that she didn't recognize. Andrew Gate. It meant nothing to her. She didn't watch the news. Didn't have time for newspapers or social media beyond occasional scrolling during bathroom breaks. She lived in a smaller world. Her mother, the cafe. The 3-block radius between home and work. When her shift finally ended at 10 p.m., she walked home in darkness, her thin jacket insufficient against the October chill. The streetlights on Wrightwood Avenue flickered as they always did, casting uneven shadows across wet pavement. She climbed 3 flights of stairs, each step an exercise in willpower, and unlocked the door to find her mother awake on the couch, wrapped in a lavender blanket despite the radiator's weak efforts. "How was work, baby?" Joanna's voice was a whisper, frail but warm. Her silver hair escaped from its bun in soft wisps. "Same as always, Mama." Zoe lied, dropping her bag by the door. She didn't mention the $10. Didn't mention the fear currently eating at her stomach. "Don't worry. We're getting closer." Another lie. They'd saved less than $2,000. They weren't getting closer. They were drowning in slow motion, and everyone knew it except Joanna, who Zoe protected from the truth the way a parent shields a child. That night, Zoe ate crackers standing at the kitchen counter, looking at the stack of medical bills under the broken lamp. Then she lay down next to her mother on the couch, wrapping an arm around her thin frame, listening to the irregular rhythm of her breathing. In the darkness, she thought about the man from the cafe, his desperate expression, his promise to remember. She wondered if he'd already forgotten, if the crisis had passed and he'd moved on to his important meeting, his important life. It didn't matter. She hadn't helped him for gratitude or recognition. She'd helped him because it was right. And that small certainty was enough to let her finally drift into uneasy sleep. At 9:15 a.m. the next morning, Andrew Gate stood in his office on the 42nd floor, staring at the Chicago River below without seeing it. Behind him, his executive assistant Nancy Pelosi hovered with a tablet, rattling off the day's schedule. "Mr. Gate, the quarterly review is in 15 minutes. Then you have the conference call with Tokyo at 11. Lunch with the mayor at..." "Cancel them," Andrew said. Nancy stopped mid-sentence. "I'm sorry. Cancel everything except absolute emergencies. Reschedule what you can." He turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "I need you to find someone." Nancy had worked for Andrew for 6 years. She'd seen him negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking, fire executives without hesitation, work 90-hour weeks without complaint. She'd never seen him like this. Distracted, almost haunted. Find who? A waitress. At a cafe in Logan Square called the Lighthouse. He described Zoe. Her braided hair, her hazel eyes. The way she'd moved with quiet certainty despite obvious exhaustion. "I need to know everything about her situation," discreetly. By noon, Nancy had the information. She entered Andrew's office with a folder, her expression troubled. "Mr. Gate, this is quite a story." Andrew gestured for her to sit. What Nancy told him over the next 20 minutes changed something fundamental in his chest. Zoe Thompson, 28. Single, no family except her mother. Working 14-hour days, 7 days a week. Mother dying of a heart condition requiring immediate surgery. No insurance adequate to cover it. Medical debt already in the tens of thousands. Living in a deteriorating apartment in a building that should have been condemned years ago. And despite all of it, despite the crushing weight of circumstances that would break most people, she'd given her last $10 to a stranger. "Jesus," Andrew whispered, running a hand through his hair. Nancy continued. "I spoke with the cafe owner. He says she never complains, never asks for help, never accepts charity. When he tried to give her extra food from the kitchen once, she refused. Said other people needed it more." Andrew stood abruptly, walking to the window. His reflection stared back at him. Expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive life built on his mother's lessons about never forgetting where you came from. Helen Harrison had been a waitress in Chicago's South Side. She'd worked herself to death to put Andrew through business school, teaching him that success without compassion was just another word for emptiness. He'd lost her to a heart attack when he was 28. The same age Zoe was now. The same condition her mother faced. "Nancy," he said slowly, "get me Victoria Lane on the phone. Then James Chun, Margaret Okonjo, David Rothstein." He rattled off 9 names, all members of his inner circle. All billionaires, or near enough. "Tell them I'm calling in every favor. Tell them it's important." "What are you planning?" Nancy asked, though she was already dialing. "Something my mother would approve of," Andrew replied. That afternoon, while Andrew made calls from his penthouse in the Gold Coast, Zoe stood in a sterile examination room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, holding her mother's hand as a doctor delivered news in careful, measured tones. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm afraid we can't wait much longer. The valve deterioration has accelerated. We need to schedule surgery within the next 3 weeks, or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Joanna squeezed Zoe's hand. "We'll figure it out, baby. We always do." But as they took the bus home, sitting side by side in silence, both women knew the truth. They wouldn't figure it out. There was no solution, no miracle waiting around the corner. Just time running out and a bill they couldn't pay. That night, Zoe returned to the lighthouse for the evening shift. She moved through familiar motions, grinding coffee, steaming milk, smiling at customers, but something had broken inside her. The fear she'd held at bay for months was finally winning. She locked herself in the bathroom on her break and cried silently, hands pressed against her mouth, shoulders shaking. When she emerged, face washed and apron straightened, Tiana was waiting by the sink. "You okay, Z?" "Fine." Zoe lied, tying her apron tighter. "Just tired." "You're always tired," Tiana said gently. "When's the last time you took a day off?" Zoe couldn't remember. She returned to the counter and kept moving, because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant drowning. Meanwhile, across the city, Andrew sat in his penthouse library surrounded by 9 video call screens. Victoria Lane's face occupied the largest. She sat in her Washington, D.C. office, diamond choker catching the light. James Chun joined from Singapore. Margaret Okonjo from London. David Rothstein from New York. Others dialed in from Los Angeles, Dubai, Tokyo, Stockholm, Miami. 10 billionaires, collectively worth over $100 billion, all listening to Andrew tell a story about a waitress and $10. "I'm not asking for charity," Andrew said carefully. "I'm asking for investment in something we've all forgotten. The belief that kindness still matters. This woman gave me the only money she had, knowing she'd go hungry. She didn't know who I was. She didn't ask for anything in return. She just saw someone who needed help and helped." Silence on the video calls. Then Victoria spoke. "What do you need?" "I need you to trust me, and I need you to act fast." One by one they agreed. Not because Andrew asked, but because the story touched something they'd thought business had beaten out of them, the capacity to be moved. The next morning, Zoe arrived at the lighthouse at 6:30 a.m. for opening shift. The sun was finally out, streaming through the cafe windows and turning Milwaukee Avenue golden. She was exhausted, had slept maybe 3 hours, but moved with mechanical efficiency, setting up the espresso machine, arranging pastries, preparing for another day. Marcus arrived at 7, nodded his usual greeting, and began counting the register. "Gonna be a good day," he said, peering out the window. Weather always brings people in. At 9 a.m. exactly, the door opened. Zoe looked up from the espresso machine and froze. Andrew Gate stood in the doorway, wearing another immaculate navy suit. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood 9 other people, all dressed like they'd walked off the pages of Forbes magazine. Men and women in designer clothes. radiating wealth and power. Customers at the tables went silent. Tiana, mid-order, stopped talking. Marcus emerged from the back, eyes wide. The cafe that had been full of comfortable morning chatter became a church. Andrew walked directly to the counter, his gray eyes locked on Zoe's. "Good morning, Zoe." She couldn't find her voice. Her hands, still holding the portafilter, began to shake. What's happening?" "I need you to come outside for a moment," Andrew said gently. "Please. It won't take long." Zoe looked at Marcus, who nodded slowly, as confused as she was. She untied her apron with trembling fingers and followed Andrew outside to the terrace table. The delegation of strangers filing behind her like witnesses to something sacred. On the table sat a thick envelope, sealed with a gold emblem. Andrew picked it up and held it out to her. "This is for you." Zoe stared at the envelope like it might explode. "What is this?" "Open it," Andrew said. With shaking hands, she broke the seal. Inside were papers, and beneath them a cashier's check. She had to read the number 3 times before her brain could process it. $15,000. Made out to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, with Joanna Thompson's patient number in the memo line. "This. I don't understand," Zoe whispered, the check fluttering in her hands. "This is for your mother's surgery," Andrew said. "It's already been arranged with the hospital. They're expecting your call to schedule." Zoe's knees buckled. Andrew caught her arm, guided her into a chair. "But that's not all," he continued, and nodded to the others. One by one, they stepped forward. Victoria Lane handed Zoe a leather folder. "Full medical coverage for your mother. All treatments, all medications, all follow-up care. For life." James Chun placed a key on the table. "A 3-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. Paid for 2 years. Lease is in your name." Margaret Okonjo added an envelope. "Full scholarship to any university in the state. Any program you choose." David Rothstein set down a contract. 3 job offers at companies I own. Starting salary, $55,000. You pick which one, or none if you prefer. The offerings continued. A medical fund. A mentorship program with access to the city's top business leaders. A car lease. Furniture for the new apartment. A trust fund for emergency expenses. Zoe couldn't breathe. The world tilted sideways. "Why?" she finally gasped. "Why are you doing this?" Andrew knelt in front of her chair so their eyes were level. "Because you gave me the only thing you had when I was a stranger. You reminded me what my mother taught me, that humanity matters more than money. And I shared your story with people who needed that reminder too." He gestured to the 9 billionaires standing in a semicircle around them. "We're not doing this because you need it, Zoe. We're doing it because you deserve it. You gave us back something we'd lost." Zoe broke. Tears streamed down her face, her body shaking with sobs she couldn't control. Andrew offered her a handkerchief, monogrammed, expensive, and she clutched it like a lifeline. Inside the cafe, customers pressed against the windows, watching. Marcus wiped his eyes with his apron. Tiana stood frozen, her hand over her mouth. "I don't know what to say," Zoe whispered between sobs. "You already said everything," Andrew replied. "With your actions, all we're asking is that you do the same for someone else when you can. Pay it forward." Victoria Lane, the woman who'd built an empire on ruthless negotiation, stepped forward with surprising gentleness. "My dear, I've spent 30 years acquiring wealth. You showed me, in one $10 gesture, how to use it." She placed a business card in Zoe's hand. "Call me when you're ready. I'd like to fund your first community project, whatever that may be." James Chin added, We're all here to support you. You're not alone anymore." Zoe looked around at these powerful strangers, at Andrew, whose eyes held something beyond pity. Respect, admiration, recognition. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate, but all she had. "Thank you." The surgery happened 3 days later. Zoe sat in Northwestern Memorial's surgical waiting area, watching the clock crawl forward, the leather folder from Victoria Lane open on her lap. Inside were insurance documents she'd already memorized, letters from doctors confirming coverage, proof that her mother would receive the best cardiac care in the Midwest. After 4 hours, a surgeon in green scrubs emerged, pulling down his mask, smiling. "The surgery went perfectly. Your mother is going to be fine." Zoe collapsed into the chair, crying for what felt like the 100th time that week. But this time, the tears were different. They were relief, gratitude, joy. Emotions she'd forgotten existed beneath the constant weight of fear. Over the next month, Joanna Thompson recovered in a private room overlooking Lake Michigan. Nurses checking on her every 2 hours, meals delivered 3 times a day, specialists consulting on her care plan. Zoe visited every day after her shifts at the lighthouse. Andrew had encouraged her to keep working there as long as she wanted, to maintain the routine that grounded her. Marcus had given her a raise without being asked. Tiana covered for her when she needed extra time at the hospital. The Café regulars, hearing pieces of the story, left generous tips and words of encouragement. "Your mama raised you right," an elderly teacher told Zoe one morning. And now the world's setting things right for her. In early November, Zoe and Joanna moved into the Lincoln Park apartment. It was 3 times the size of their old place, with windows that didn't leak, heat that worked, a kitchen with modern appliances Zoe didn't know how to use yet. Joanna cried when she saw her bedroom, a queen bed with a real mattress, soft blankets, a reading chair by the window overlooking the park. "Baby, this is too much," she whispered. "Mama, this is exactly enough," Zoe replied, helping her mother sit. "You deserve this. We both do." In December, Zoe started classes at DePaul University. Enrolled in their public service program. She'd chosen the path carefully, not business, not medicine, but something that felt right, community development and nonprofit management. She wanted to understand how systems worked, how to build organizations that lasted, how to create change beyond individual acts of kindness. Andrew had been thrilled with her choice. "You're going to transform the city," he'd said over coffee at the lighthouse, where they now met every Wednesday morning. "You already have." The mentorship program connected Zoe with Chicago's most influential leaders. She attended board meetings, shadowed nonprofit directors, learned about grant writing and fundraising. She was the youngest person in most rooms, the only one without family wealth or business degrees. But she brought something none of them had, lived experience of the systems they were trying to fix. "We need your voice," Margaret Okonjo told her during a dinner at the Union League Club. "We've been designing solutions for problems we don't understand. You understand." By January, Zoe had drafted a proposal for a new organization. She called it The Last 10, a name that captured both the final dollars someone might possess and the power of choosing generosity anyway. The mission was clear. Identify individuals who demonstrated extraordinary compassion despite personal crisis, then provide them with comprehensive support, medical, financial, educational, emotional. Not charity, but recognition. Not pity, but partnership. Andrew read the proposal in his penthouse office, Nancy waiting for his feedback. When he finished, he looked up with eyes that were suspiciously bright. "This is brilliant, Zoe. When do we launch?" "We?" Zoe asked. "I can't do this alone." "You won't. I'm your first board member." He placed the proposal on his desk. "And I'm committing $5 million in seed funding. No strings." Zoe stared at him. "5 I can't accept." "Yes, you can. And you will." Andrew stood, walking to the window overlooking the city. My mother died because she couldn't afford proper health care. She worked herself to death. If she'd had someone like you, someone who saw her worth, who helped without judgment, she might still be here." His voice caught. "This isn't about me paying you back, Zoe. This is about building something that honors what people like you and my mother represent." The last 10 launched in March with a small office in Logan Square, 3 staff members, and a wait list of applicants that grew daily. The criteria were specific. Individuals facing crisis who'd recently demonstrated significant compassion toward others. A homeless man who'd given his coat to a stranger. A single mother who'd volunteered at a food bank while working 2 jobs. A teenager who'd tutored younger students despite failing her own classes. The stories poured in, each one a testament to the human capacity for kindness even in darkness. The media discovered the story in April. A Chicago Tribune journalist wrote a feature titled, "The Waitress Who Changed Everything," detailing Zoe's journey from last $10 to nonprofit founder. The article went viral. National outlets picked it up. Zoe appeared on morning shows. Her voice steady as she explained the philosophy behind the last 10. You don't need wealth to change someone's life. You need heart. And when those acts of heart are recognized and supported, they create ripples that transform communities. The response was overwhelming. Donations flooded in. Volunteers signed up. Other cities reached out asking how to replicate the model. Andrew watched from the sidelines with quiet pride. He'd restructured the Gates Group's mission statement, creating a social impact division that invested in community development, healthcare access, and education equity. His board had resisted at first. "This isn't our business model," they'd argued. But Andrew had been immovable. "Then we changed the model. We remember that businesses exist within communities, and communities need support, not extraction." Victoria Lane and the other billionaires followed suit. One by one, they announced new initiatives, medical grants, scholarship funds, housing programs. They called it the $10 effect, the idea that small acts of compassion, when amplified by resources and recognition, could restructure entire systems. In June, Zoe was invited to speak at the Business Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C. She stood backstage at the Hay Adams Hotel, wearing a simple white suit Andrew had helped her choose, heart pounding as she heard her introduction. "Please welcome Zoe Thompson, founder of The Last 10 and proof that the most powerful force in business isn't capital, it's compassion." The ballroom was packed with CEOs, senators, investors, journalists. Zoe walked to the podium, looking out at faces that would have terrified her a year ago. Now she saw them as what they were, people capable of change if someone showed them how. "I'm not extraordinary," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I'm just someone who had the opportunity to act with compassion when it would have been easier to walk away. The difference is that my compassion was met with recognition and support, which allowed it to grow into something bigger." She told her story. The morning at the lighthouse, the $10, the surgery, the apartment, the university. The last 10. Every day, people make choices like I did. They give time they don't have. Money they can't spare. Energy they're running out of. They do it because it's right, not because anyone's watching. But imagine if we were watching. Imagine if we created systems that caught these acts of kindness and amplified them instead of ignoring them. The audience was silent. Zoe continued, "I'm here today because one person, Andrew Gate, decided to look beyond the transaction and see the human. And because 9 other people believed that human worth investing in. But for every person like me who gets recognized, there are thousands who don't. Who give everything and receive nothing, who die exhausted and invisible. That's what we're trying to change. Not through charity, but through systemic recognition of value that capitalism misses." The applause was long and sincere. Senators stood. CEOs wiped their eyes. Andrew, sitting in the third row, smiled like a proud father. By September, the last 10 had expanded to 12 cities across the country. The model was replicable. Local volunteers identified candidates, a board reviewed applications, partners provided resources. In Los Angeles, they supported a teacher who'd been buying supplies for students with her own money for 15 years. In Miami, a construction worker who'd been mentoring at-risk youth while working 60-hour weeks. In Boston, a nurse who'd been covering extra shifts unpaid to care for underserved patients. Each person received comprehensive support, not just money, but connections, opportunities, recognition of their worth. The impact studies started coming in. Recipients of Last 10 support showed decreased health issues, increased economic stability, and continued patterns of community engagement. More importantly, their stories inspired others. The nonprofit tracked what they called ripple effects, instances where someone who'd heard about the Last 10 chose to act with similar compassion in their own lives. The numbers were staggering. One act of kindness, when recognized and amplified, could inspire hundreds more. On a Saturday morning in October, exactly 1 year after she'd given Andrew her last $10, Zoe walked into the Lighthouse Café. It looked exactly the same: yellow pendant lights, wooden tables, the smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon. Marcus was behind the counter. Tiana was serving the corner table. Regulars sat in their usual spots. Zoe ordered a coffee and sat at the table where Andrew had sat, soaked and desperate, where everything had changed. A new waitress approached. Young, maybe 20, with tired eyes that Zoe recognized. "Can I get you anything else?" the girl asked. Zoe smiled. "Just a piece of advice." The waitress waited, curious. "If someone comes in without money, help them anyway. You never know what it might start." The girl looked confused but nodded. As Zoe sipped her coffee, she thought about the journey, from exhausted waitress to nonprofit founder, from invisible to influential, from desperate to purposeful. But the core of who she was hadn't changed. She was still the woman who believed in helping others, who saw humanity in strangers, who knew that kindness was the only currency that multiplied when spent. Her phone buzzed. A text from Andrew. "Board meeting at 3. We're voting on international expansion. Your mother's asking if you're coming for dinner tonight. I'm cooking." Zoe smiled. Andrew had become family, mentor, friend, surrogate father. He'd found in her and Joanna what he'd lost when his mother died: people who valued him not for his wealth, but for his character. They'd found in him the support system neither had known growing up. They'd built something more valuable than money, a chosen family rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. As Zoe walked out of the lighthouse into the crisp autumn air, she passed a woman struggling with grocery bags while managing 2 small children. Without thinking, Zoe grabbed 2 bags. "Let me help." The woman looked surprised, then grateful. "Thank you. You have no idea how much I needed that today." "I think I do," Zoe replied, walking alongside her down Milwaukee Avenue. They talked for 3 blocks about kids, work, the challenge of making ends meet. When they reached the woman's building, Zoe pulled out a Last 10 business card. "If you ever need help, call this number. Someone will answer." The woman took the card with tears in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Zoe thought about the question, the same one she'd asked Andrew a year ago. "Because someone did it for me. And now I get to do it for you. That's how it works." Later that evening, in her mother's apartment in Lincoln Park, Zoe sat at the dinner table while Andrew attempted to cook pasta and Joanna directed from her chair by the window. The apartment was filled with laughter, warmth, and the smell of garlic burning slightly. "This is perfect," Joanna said. watching Andrew frantically stir sauce while Zoe set the table. "What is?" Zoe asked. "This. Us. Family we chose instead of the one we were born with." She reached out and took Zoe's hand. "You saved us, baby. Not just with the money, but by showing me that kindness still matters. That we matter." Zoe squeezed her mother's hand, then pulled Andrew into the embrace. "We saved each other," she said. "That's the whole point." As they ate dinner together, this unlikely family built from $10 and a choice to see humanity in strangers, Zoe thought about the lesson she'd carry forever. Small acts, when done from the heart, have a power that neither logic nor money can explain. They ripple outward in ways you can't predict, touching lives you'll never meet, changing systems you didn't know existed. One person's last $10 had transformed thousands of lives. Not because the money was magic, but because the compassion behind it was real. And real compassion, when recognized and amplified, can restructure the world. It starts with seeing others. It continues with helping them. And it spreads when those helped choose to help in turn. That was the true power of the last 10, not the money it distributed, but the movement it created. A movement based on the radical idea that every person has worth. Every act of kindness matters. And every one of us has the power to change someone's world if we're willing to give what we have, even when it's the last thing we possess. If this story made your heart race, made you think, or made you believe in kindness again, then don't just leave. Subscribe right now. Show us some of your kindness by hitting the subscribe button. Help us share our videos for more people to see them. Thank you as you do so. See you in the next one.